Sure.
You're good? Okay. Hi,
Uh,
welcome everyone to our monthly Alliance meeting webinar where we talk about different solutions and and information regarding addictions and general mental health or brain health. And so today we have Jeff Jones, who is going to talk to us about whole family recovery and talking about Aminos as the foundation of healing, as the title says. And next month tentatively, we're having Mr. Val Priscaru. He's going to talk about genomics, genetics, and addiction. So we're still waiting to get his confirmation, but we heard first tentative yes, so that should be good. And then we welcome all of you to join the alliance. We could use as much support as you can give us, and we will send you a link if you want to become a member. It's not too expensive to become a member. And if you want to be part of the community, that would be also highly, highly appreciated. So, without much else, I am going to give you a brief introduction to Jeff Jones. I've known Jeff Jones for several years. He's been part of the Alliance. We've been in the same sort of addictions area for several years. He completed Christina's course on mental health and nutrition. He's certified, and he also has many other certifications. He's a licensed professional counselor. He is a certified addiction counselor. He's an interventionist, and he's always been sort of looking for answers to some of life's puzzles, like how to help people with substance use disorders and addictions in general. And I think Jeff will go ahead and introduce himself a little bit more. And I really appreciate Jeff coming and talking to us about his subject. He actually has a couple of courses that he'll talk about during this meeting. All right, Jeff.
Great. Well, thank you very much for the introduction, Valsa. And thank you very much to the Alliance for hosting me. I super appreciate it. One of the first things that I want to say is that my why for approaching this as from a family perspective is that for years, every day, several hundred people die from overdose or an addiction related cause. And that has always surprised me that that hasn't gone down. And it's like families can be a grassroots approach to decrease the amount of deaths, at least start in their own family. So, I will be talking about my journey, who I am, and how I got to this new perspective of addiction and recovery. And when I say new perspective, I'm essentially meaning two things. One is starting with families first while their loved one is still in active addiction, and the second is a bio-nutritional approach to symptoms that family members may have living with the stress of addiction, but also post acute withdrawal symptoms that an individual going into detox or recovery will experience. Um, and so I will be talking about black and white thinking being, what I see as the traditional thinking, the traditional approach. And I will be talking about both and thinking, which includes black and white thinking, but it expands from black and white thinking. And I'll talk about learning points from both of those. And my big suggestion for family members, which I'm sure it comes as nothing new, is having an internal foundation of support is going to be beneficial. And that support could be spirituality, religion, whatever someone resonates with. Um, and the reason why that's important is because addiction's rules of engagement will rock you off your center. I will be talking about the family recovery solution. It's a three-phase process. Essentially, families can create family rules that become stronger than addictions rules, and they can enable health. And so the three-phase program starts with enabling health with each phase. I'll talk more about that. And this whole thing is set up so families can make their own best decision step by step, moment by moment. Of course, I have a perspective. Of course, I can say, do this, do that. What I have learned is that I don't want families to become dependent on me. I want them to learn how to make their own best decision. So, okay, so meet my Grandpa Earl. Um, he is the person in my family that had alcoholism, and his youngest daughter, my mom, was a trauma survivor. So something happened between my Grandpa Earl and my mom that my mom never talked about directly. She alluded to numerous times when she would get triggered, um, but she never did her own healing work. She never went to a therapist, and I became a therapist. How about that? So this trickle down kind of thing, I was the recipient of my grandfather's alcoholism, and my grandfather was the one in my life that showered more love and attention upon me than anybody, and it really caught my attention. And in some ways, from an intergenerational transmission standpoint, it kind of gave me permission to do what he did. Um, think like he thought, and be as blatant and um, drink whenever the way he did. So it wasn't safe in my family for me to love my grandfather in my mom's presence. This was kind of like the hotbed of my own codependency. But as a child and young adult, and even into becoming a therapist, I carried this question: why is love so confusing in my family? And so um, once I became a therapist, my focus was families, addiction, and eventually trauma. And this spotlight diagram is something that I've been using for probably 9 or 10 years. The three orange circles in the middle are come from Dr. Stephen Cartman, the drama triangle. The four on the outside edge, the two green ones and two orange ones here, that those come from Virginia Satir's Four Family Roles, and the drama triangle and the distancing one. The distancing role comes from Eric Walter Storff's Four Trauma Roles. Eric Walter Storff was a protege of Peter Levine. So that's some academic backstory. However, I will use this. I have used this in so many different ways, but today I'm going to start by using this to tell my own story. So when I was a child, um, 7, 8, 9 years old, and my grandfather was still alive, my grandfather was in that center circle. And that center circle can be looked at as the origin of the problem or the stress. Excuse me. And, from a clinical standpoint, we could think of that center circle as the identified patient. It could also be the addicted individual. But anyhow, at 7, 8, 9 years old, I was in the distracting role, and how that played out for me is I brought in humor, I brought in lightness, because when my grandfather was in the room, it also came with a certain amount of tension. My grandfather is this big, huge man, booming voice, and my mom would be on the you know, outskirts. So I was kind of distracting. I knew something was going on. I was trying to bring lightness. Then after my grandfather died, my mom
Mm.
was in that center circle, and I went into the avoiding role. I was an expert avoider of conflict. And the lines are communication. And so I wanted to maintain communication with my mom, but I didn't want to talk about the problem. And when my mom got triggered, I didn't want to say anything about that because I didn't want to risk losing her love. Then dropping down below that, this orange circle here, the blaming role, um, the blaming role at the end of that line has a little arrow. Generally, the person in the blaming role can see exactly what's going on with that person in the center circle here. And they can be very direct. Their communication is short, it's quick, it's direct. It can be blaming, or the person in the center can interpret it as blaming. But for me, I was not blaming others as a child, this brilliant child strategy. I would turn that blame in on myself. Again, I didn't want to risk being the disruptor. And then over here, kind of snuggled up at about 7 o'clock on the clock face, is the helping role. And the person in the helping role, they generally see what the problem is and they help without asking. And they may ask, like, hey, you need treatment. I'm going to do some research. Would you look into it? And they say, yeah. But then they can't do what they say, they can't be congruent. So the helping role can go out and do a lot of things, do a lot of research, give it to the person in the center circle, and they can't do anything with it. They can't take action. Um, and then the distancing role up here, no line, no communication. Generally, the person in the distancing role has been in all these other roles over and over and over. They've tried to, you know, help things in the family, and they've come to the conclusion that this family is just crazy making and I need to get out of here, kind of thing. And they may, leave and go 1,000 miles away. I did that. They may change their contact information. I did not do that. But what I want to say about each of these roles, it's just a snapshot, because these roles can be changing very quickly. I can think I'm in the helping role, but then the person in the center circle may interpret me as being in the blaming role. So things get very confusing very, very quickly. And each one of these roles expresses a primary strategy or belief about loving, but also taking care of the problem. Like, is that possible? So they're not on the same page. The family members generally are not on the same page. And so switching really quickly, this TC in the upper right hand corner, when I use this as an interventionist, I would explain to families that they need to make change too. And if their loved one were to go into a treatment center in the upper right here, and they were to be there 30, 60, 90, 120 days, whatever, and they were to learn a lot of things and they came back into their life and they wanted to practice those, coming back into the family, if the family didn't change any of these relational behaviors, then the family ends up being a potentially toxic place for an individual newly in recovery to come back into. Imagine they come out of treatment, they come back into a family system like this, and where do they fit? Oh, there's still a vacancy in the center circle. So um, there's a lot of different ways that I have used this, but um, so this confusion of what was going on in the family, I really wanted um, to go to school because I knew that academia held the key. I thought it held the key. I thought that was the answer. And early on, I was in a environment where conflict was handled very well, unlike my family that I grew up in. And so it just really caught my attention, and I became a student of conflict resolution, and I became a mediator, and I did a lot of mediation in the court system, in small claims, in um, in work groups, nonprofits. I did a lot of mediation, divorce, et cetera, et cetera. But what I loved about the mediator role is there was different perspectives that were being expressed by different people, and I could ask questions about each of these perspectives and ask questions that actually both parties could learn from. And that inspired me to go in to become a therapist. And, you know, being a therapist, there's all kinds of different modalities that a young therapist learns in in school, and it was all these different perceptions again, and I was fascinated with it. And because families and addiction and eventually trauma was my focus, I became an interventionist. And I, as a therapist, I worked in some treatment centers, I worked in some state mandated programs, and some other addiction recovery facilities. But what I noticed is that the multiple perspectives that I really appreciated as a mediator and learning different models of therapy in the addiction recovery world, it became very narrow. It became very focused on that one person, and they were the problem. And of course, there were problems there, and the solution was all on them to change. I the When I became a nutritional recovery life coach, as Valsa said, I took level one and level two training from Christina Vasilak. And that really opened my eyes in such a big way. And it was my first experience of kind of like out of the box thinking with addiction recovery. And it was phenomenal in so many different ways. And I'll get into some of them. Um, but it was this traditional addiction treatment, which I'm framing as black and white thinking, very, kind of narrow, and then outside of that narrow focus, what was outside? And the bionutritional approach was one of the things that I learned that was outside that. And then the more I learned about family, the more I saw a whole lot of other things outside of the narrow focus. So black and white thinking, a basic definition here is black and white thinking is thinking in extremes. It's I have an impulsive thought, it comes up, I believe it immediately, and it's true, and I don't spend any time considering anything else because I know what's true with my black and white thinking. Like this picture, you know, she's the very best person. No, she's the worst person, one extreme or the other. What I noticed about black and white thinking with addiction, of course, the individual with the addiction, the more their addiction progressed, the more black and white thinking there was, but it also spread to family members, black and white thinking, and addiction professionals, black and white thinking. And it was curious to me. So black and white thinking very quickly here, good or evil, right or wrong, love, hate, addict, normie, I'm sick or I'm well. And so this is almost like a default that happens very quickly. There's some advantages to it for sure. I'm I don't want to give the message that I am discounting black and white thinking, but I am expanding the black and white thinking so that this, my hands are out, informs this down here, and this informs this. So that's what I'm doing here. So black and white thinking in the healing process. And so I will own this. I don't think I'm the only one that has this opinion, but black and white thinking in the healing process is just about every symptom. The part of the solution or the solution comes with a pharmaceutical solution. And I see pharmaceuticals as toxic and potentially addictive substances. And so my thought here is, why not use amino acids, which are have tons of research. And what I want to say is, if you are interested in looking at that research, go to the Alliance for Addiction Solutions website. In the menu bar up top, off to the left, is our approach. There's a lot of good information there. Um, so, um, generally, black and white thinking is, telling people what to think, not necessarily how to make their best decisions. So there's some results from the black and white thinking traditional approach to addiction recovery. So this is a 20-year spread of deaths from opioid overdose, including prescription and non-prescription opioids. And when I look at something like that, to me, it seems obvious there's room for improvement here. And, you know, I've thought this for years, and I am not seeing me through my eyes where there's a lot of improvements from traditional thinking. Um, and so, again, you know, families can be a grassroots part of change early and solutions to become a stronger part of the whole addiction recovery process. So, both and thinking, the quick definition here is two things can be true at the same time, and there can be aspects of truth in multiple perspectives. And instead of just saying, this is true and this is not true, or this is right and this is wrong, we can really, try to identify what are aspects of truth that we see in each perspective and weave them together here. So both and thinking challenges this impulsive first thought, and it can incorporate multiple perspectives and multiple perspectives from a treatment plan kind of thing, but it can also incorporate multiple perspectives of different family members, like that spotlight diagram that I showed you. Okay, and then both and thinking in healing is using amino acids and pharmaceuticals together. They can work together. Now, I think probably a lot of people who are listening to this already know that, but for people who don't, um, nutraceuticals or amino acids and supplements and pharmaceuticals can work together. Myself, my own bias, and I'll name it, is starting with amino acids because it is a non-toxic, non-addictive substance. And when pharmaceuticals are needed, um, they can come in. And I know there are doctors who they write their, and actually Balsa, you may be one of them, but they use both in their treatment plan. Okay. So black and white thinking and both and thinking in addiction. And so what I'm doing here is a little bit of a compare and contrast, not so much an either or, because remember, both and includes black and white. But traditionally, it's so easy to just have the black and white, kind of run the whole show, and use that unilaterally. So black and white thinking. We have this thought that comes up, it's an impulse, and immediately I believe my own first thought. Both and is I'm aware of that. I recognize that thought comes up and I slow myself down and I question that first thought. So black and white thinking, which is generally what I see as a um, cultural communication pattern with individuals in addiction and their family and probably everybody else. And that is this narrow, myopic focus on the loved one. The LO in this slide is loved one. So it's this narrow, myopic focus, and black and white thinking stays there. So both and thinking is it is expanding that focus to include patterns around what's happening right here. So a brief little, when I say patterns, I'm talking about mixed messages about addiction in the culture, and those patterns are impersonal. And when they trickle down into the family, they become personal. And because we don't, this isn't obvious, it's very easy to take these personal. So black and white change is quick, it's abrupt. Both and change is a little slower, it's an incremental process. And then on the black and white side, what ends up happening a lot is that with this narrow focus is to push or prod or poke at that individual with addiction and get them to change. And that's the only solution. Just keep poking. Or 180 degrees from that is to accommodate the loved one with the addiction. And then on the other side, the both and side is, and this is a concept that I came up with that comes from Dr. Bill Urey, an international mediator, but it's separate addiction from the essence of the individual that has the addiction, the loved one in the family with the addiction. So in our thinking, we want to separate addiction from the essence of our loved one. And that the thinking is the first change. The next is to incorporate this into speaking, the separating addiction into speaking, which could be very direct, firm boundaries with consequences that can be acted upon with addiction while staying connected to the essence of our loved one. And so Dr. Bill Urey, who this concept comes from, he wrote the book Getting to Yes. One of his principles, one of his very first principles was separate the person from the problem. Okay, so on the black and white side, we we want, like, the main solution in the mainstream is detach with love, which of course detaching with love is a solution once the family is burned out and they've been at this for a long period of time and maybe years, maybe a decade. Um, and but detach with love is not a long-term solution to actually inspire an individual in addiction to make change. So on the both and side, what can also be done, and I've already mentioned some things above that family members can do, um, family members can detach from their own patterns. So, the narrow, myopic norm of black and white is here. So when family members slow down and expand and they see patterns that they have taken on, they can start to change their end of those patterns, their end of the communication, or their end of changing a reaction to a response. Okay, so learning points here. Learning points with black and white thinking. And for me, the points on here come from my time as an interventionist. And intervention, essentially, it sets the stage for one outcome, and that outcome is to try to get that person into treatment. And then once that person is in treatment, the interventionist can kind of wipe off their hands and they've done their job, and you know everybody will live happily ever after, which that's not the case. You can tell I'm being a bit sarcastic here. Um, so, learning points from black and white. An interventionist is the outside element that's hired to come into the family to have a process that makes change, that gets that one person to agree to go into treatment. And the interventionist holds the power of the process. They're the ones with the skill. And there's a risk. There's a risk to intervention. And I think everyone knows that. Anyone who's had an intervention, I would think, knows that. But there's a risk of re traumatization, not just to the individual with the addiction, but the whole family. And I could get into stories here, but I'm trying to kind of move along. Anyhow, I want to acknowledge the range of outcome. There's been interventions that have saved people's lives, and I acknowledge that. That is real. I am not discounting that. I am also saying that as an interventionist and being, the secretary of a national intervention organization, I know there have been interventions where the individual says, no, I'm not going into treatment. And the interventionist often with some models of intervention, they are trained to encourage the family to set boundaries and have consequences. Like the boundary would be, you are never welcome in my house again. You will never see my children again unless you get sober. And within a week or two, that person ends up ending their life. So there's huge, like there's a lot of stake here. This is a life and death situation. I just want to acknowledge that. And harm can come from it. So this word iatrogenesis is a medical term that means harm that can come from a process intended to heal. And so I just want to acknowledge there's a big range here. And then learning points from the both and end of this is that the family can change first. And when the family changes first, they end up changing how the family works, how the family does family together, and that has an impact on the individual with the addiction. And the family is the one that holds the power of the process. There's no one way to do this. There are many different ways families do family together. And, for families with a growth mindset who are open to looking at a both and model and both and thinking, this is what they're getting into. And so I just want to be clear with that. Early family education about these mixed messages, and a lot of times mixed messages in the culture end in black and white thinking, and that becomes what we hear as the do all end all solution. So when families have a loved one who's still in active addiction, they are most motivated to make change. And there are so many different ways that they can do that other than just detach with love. Um, and so if the family does not start to have family rules that shield them from addiction's rules, addiction will take the power and they will run with it. And so addiction has rules of engagement. So, rules of engagement is a military term that means at what point the military begins to use force. And so addiction's rules of engagement, addiction uses force whenever it wants to. And so in mild addiction, which we rarely think of, I rarely think of mild addiction. And we live in a culture that enables addiction more and longer than any of us have been alive. So addiction's rules of engagement are going to continue to run over us unless the family begins to think differently, create their own rules, and the family starts to lead. And this is directly contrary than what is the slogan? Oh, I as a family member can't do anything. I need to wait till my addicted loved one hits rock bottom. I say no. So I'm taking a position here. So this both and thinking, which I'm framing here as new thinking, it leads to new perspectives, new decisions, potentially new actions. And there is so much that a family can do, and families are different. So it isn't like I'm going to say there is just one process. Um, so because the word enabling is in the addiction recovery space, it just means one thing. It's negative. Families are enabling the addiction. I think we all know that uh, enabling can mean enabling something that makes something else easier, that's actually helpful, productive. So I use the word enabling health versus enabling old patterns that reinforce addiction. And one of the clues for family members is when they start to make change in their thinking and language and behavior, to pay attention of what happens inside and where do they feel most empowered. Okay, so this is the three-phase process. And it is enabling health within one's own body, enabling health within one's relationships, specifically that relationship with the family member who has the addiction. And then the third phase is enabling health within how one's family does family together. Okay. Um, so I want to name here inner foundational support that every family member, I believe, really, really needs. And that can be religion, it can be spirituality. What I use here is divine law principles. Two of them are the bullet points here. There's many of them, actually. So, as a family member, we can assist others first and foremost by embracing our own expansion, our own growth to the fullest extent. And when we do that, we can help perhaps the individual with the addiction recognize they have the power within themselves for their own change, their evolution, their recovery, their healing, whatever language you want to use here. Um, okay, so phase one of the family recovery solution. This in itself has been a practice I have been doing for probably 6 or 7 years myself. So this isn't something that a family does, for a week or two and then they're good to go and they can forget everything. This is lifestyle change. So this leads into potential transformation of family members. And um, these bullet points are what I see where family members can build up the functioning of their body. So the first one is mindset. Every, excuse me, every morning, um, spending some time to get my mind in the right place for approaching my day. And there's a number of different ways to do that. And then managing the nervous system. And I see the nervous system, and I have been a Dr. Stephen Porges, kind of student for many, many years. But I see the nervous system as being so important, and why it isn't in traditional addiction recovery important for families to know what's going on inside their body when their nervous system is being activated, and that's a clue. I don't know why that is. There's not more attention on that. So, and then the feed the brain, balance neurotransmitters, and support adrenals. All three of those come directly from my being a student with Christina Vasilok in her trainings. Christina's, one of the things I've heard her say over and over again is feeding the brain allows the brain to handle stress gracefully, and that's the brain's job. But it's not going to be able to do that unless it's fed well. It can be fed well with regular protein throughout the day. Protein turns into amino acids. There's a specific pro recovery diet. The family can learn more about that. They can incorporate pieces while their loved one is still in active addiction. So, this is education for family members who can eventually have an influence on educating their addicted loved one. The balancing neurotransmitters. This is all the Julia Ross's amino acid therapy chart. I don't need to say a whole lot more about that. However, what I can say is, um, again, these amino acids are non-toxic, non-addictive, and they can be a first line of defense to address symptoms of imbalanced neurotransmitters, symptoms that occur living with addiction, like worried, anxious, not sleeping well at night, et cetera, et cetera. Um, and the neurotransmitter balancing with amino acids, obvious. Well, I don't know if it's obvious or not, but they can be used. They are so helpful for the individual in early recovery. And, there's so much out there written that without this support, there's all kinds of potential for increased relapse. The adrenals, that organ in the body, that system takes the biggest hit on families living with the stress of addiction for a long period of time. The adrenals can get burned out, um, not work well, and there is plenty of different nutraceutical approaches to build up the adrenals. And so all of this becoming a daily practice. Okay. And then phase two of the family recovery solution. And this is kind of this is the meat. And I know that, well, I think that many people that come to this webinar hosted by the Alliance already know about the pro recovery diet and amino acids. And if they don't, there's a lot of information on their website there, and that is helpful for their body to be in a good place to start phase two here, enabling health within their relationship. So I am going to go through this a little bit too quick because of the time here. But what I want you to know is there's probably 5 or 6 techniques or tools in here for family members to learn, that they can learn and practice, and to where they can start making change that potentially can have an impact on the relationship they have with their addicted loved one. So the recognized trickle down patterns when the family expands from just the myopic focus on the individual with the addiction, they have greatest potential to recognize impersonal patterns of mixed messages in the culture, patterns of black and white thinking in the culture. And when those patterns trickle down into the family, different family members have different perspectives of them. They have different experiences with their addicted loved one. And once they begin to recognize the impersonal and personal aspect of these patterns, family members have a much better chance to change their reaction to a response and not just act at, like take everything personal. And of course, there is a personal aspect. I'm not dismissing that at all. But what I'm saying is that there's also an impersonal aspect, and being aware of both it can be empowering. So, the core communication dynamic, the bullet point there, is this narrow, myopic focus and the poking at that one person. The only way this problem can change is to keep poking at them and have them change, and that's the only thing that can happen, which that's not my belief, that's not what I'm talking about here, but that is the core communication dynamic. So once family members recognize these patterns and they see their role in them, they can begin to change their end of a communication pattern, their end of a communication pattern. And they can start having boundaries with consequences. And there is so much to boundaries. Boundaries start with having internal boundaries. We need to know what we need before we start, kind of setting external boundaries. But I really suggest people not set boundaries until they have consequences that they can act on. If you have a consequence, I can, if you have a boundary, I can, there's greater than half% chance that addiction will roll over that boundary at any time. So be prepared. You are very good chance that you will have to act on whatever consequence you have. And so it's boundaries with addiction while staying connected with the essence of the loved one in addiction. And in these interactions, communications, it is seeing what the individual will agree to and how often, by when, and tracking it, writing that
Where are you
down.
going? This way? Hold on.
Okay, so phase three of the family recovery solution is enabling health within how one's family does family together. So a lot of the same trickle down of patterns, um, instead of just one person in one relationship, it's multiple people in the family. And with husband and wife, they have two different family of origin. There's, you know, um, the potential here to recognize communication patterns and see the how they contribute to the problem and change your end of communication patterns and stay connected with the essence of your loved one while setting boundaries with addiction. So it's recognizing differences, different perspectives, and it's talking openly about them. One of the things that um, happens in addiction in families with addiction, and I'm raising my hand because it happened in my family. Is there secrets like whatever happened between my mom and my grandfather? My mom never spoke of. It was a secret, and she took it to her grave. Um, so open discussion and being vulnerable, and it can be powerful. It can shift dynamics in a relationship. The idea here is the family creates new family rules that they can act on, they can support one another with, and addiction treatment or addiction recovery oftentimes thought of as I've been to detox, I'm good to go, or I've been to 30 days or whatever. I really see whole family recovery as a 3 to 5 year process. So here, imagine families creating family rules that override addictions rules while they stay connected to the essence of their addicted family member. And I want to ask, very genuinely, do you think this is possible? Is this doable? And I'm not thinking it's possible for people to do it alone by themselves, but is this possible? And then the Henry Ford quote, if you think it is or you think it isn't, you're right. So our thinking goes a long way to creating our reality. Um, And then my offer here, I have a 9 month program. It's education and coaching. The education can come different ways. It can come very intensive, or it can come over a period of time trickled. And there, like I have a private member agreement, and that agreement um, is very specific, and it models agreements that I ideally would encourage family members to have with their loved one, that level of clarity. So the education is a minimum of 90 minutes a week, and the coaching can come with that. The coaching can also come when it is needed, which is laser coaching. And someone can reach out to me, send me a text. I can get back to them as soon as I can get back to them, and 10 or 20 minutes of coaching, and they can make their own best decision. Should they do this? Should they do that? So emails and text messages can be sent throughout the week to help encourage family member change. And oftentimes change is offered like the picture here, but then there's like an internal response to change, like, no, I can't change. And specifically with family members changing before individuals with addiction, the whole, cultural core communication dynamic there is individuals need to change before anything can happen. And I'm saying I don't believe that, because I've seen it happen numerous times where family members change. So know that this dynamic can happen inside. And what I'm offering here is to have a conversation with a human. And the human I am talking about is myself. So I really want to encourage people to make a conscious choice here, not just oh, that was an interesting webinar, and then just go on with your day, but to make a conscious choice. Oh, black and white thinking. I am going to continue to do that. That's the easiest. I am just starting the whole addiction thing, or make a conscious choice. I want to learn more about both and thinking. And so I'm encouraging a deliberate decision here. And so QR code up here. The QR code takes you to the Family Guide to Disrupt Addiction, and you can schedule a time to connect with me. Um, no charge. And I want to thank the Alliance again for hosting this webinar. And I don't know what time it is, um, but
Jeff,
questions.
Jeff, that was fantastic. That is great. You're coming out with a book, right? You said?
Oh, yeah. Yeah. So, the name of the book is Rethinking Addiction. The subtitle is The New Family Recovery Solution. I, I, my deadline, and I've gone over chapter, numerous times, but I'm sending it to a professional editor on Monday. She will have it for 2.5 weeks, and then it will be sent um, to a woman who will do the indexing and putting it in different formats. And my plan is this will be out in November before holiday time, which is oftentimes the excessive drinking or partying time. So look for that. And if you want to be a part of, my um, team of getting this out to the world, please send me an email. That QR code that I was showing, that would be a way to connect with me. There's a lot of different ways. Questions? Any? It's almost 2 o'clock.
We can put your email in the chat if we can. But Jeff, that was really great. That was awesome to share your own personal experience and how much experience you've had over your lifetime, starting as a mediator and then coming to this world of addiction. I mean, it's that's honorable.
Yeah,
That's amazing. You have so much to offer, and your point of view about treating the whole family and not just, when we think about the way families deal with addiction in general, it's that intervention, right? It's this negative connotation. And yeah, and you're saying keep it positive if you can. But thank you. I'll open it up to questions if anyone else has any comments.
Hi. Hi, everybody. I just want to say I've had the good fortune to be collaborating with Jeff now for at least a couple of years, I think. From the ARIT training that he and Mark Stiles did, and the Academy and the Alliance and everything else. And I've seen Jeff on Zoom actually work with families, and it's a really, really positive experience.
thanks, Elena.
Any other questions or comments from anyone?
Wow.
Well,
Okay.
like I really enjoyed it. Thank you so much for sharing your life story also, right? That must have been puzzling for you throughout your life, right? Like your mom not wanting to share. It's one of those things, oddities in life.
Yeah. Yeah.
Hey, Jeff, this is Shelley Joe, and I just want to say thank you
Yeah.
for
You're welcome.
the information. It was great, and I appreciate you taking the whole family approach. So,
And
Yeah.
Jeff's number is in the chat. Sorry, email is in the chat. So if anyone wants to contact him.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Great.
right. So did you have a comment that you want to make, or was it someone else? No. Okay. All right, guys. Thank you so much for being a part of this webinar with the Alliance. Looking
Thank
forward
you,
to seeing.
Jeff.
We will
Yeah.
be talking about genetics. It hasn't been confirmed, but we're going to get a confirmation shortly, and we'll send an email to you. And we have speakers lined up for the rest of the year, early next year. So we really look forward to you joining us at the Alliance, and please consider becoming a member if you aren't already a member. And we will see you next month.
Nice.
All right.
Bye-bye.
Great week. Ciao.